Derek's boots crunched softly against the dusty ground of the planet's barren surface. His heart pounded in his chest as the red glow of the twin suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the rocky landscape. He had always been a lone explorer, but today was different. Today, something had felt off. The air was thick with tension, a strange silence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He had arrived on this planet weeks ago, a remote, unnamed world that had been marked as uninhabited by the galactic maps. His mission had been simple: gather data on its resources and any potential dangers lurking within its vast wilderness. Nothing more. But today, as he ventured deeper into the rocky ravines, he had found something unexpected, something that would change his life forever. It began when he saw the wreckage. Partially buried beneath a pile of boulders was a ship, an alien ship, unlike anything Derek had ever seen. Its sleek, curved design was both beautiful and unsettling. The metallic surface shimmered faintly in the dying light, though it was clear that the ship had suffered severe damage. A deep gouge ran across its side, and there were scorch marks from what looked like a battle. The wreckage was silent, but Derek could feel the weight of it in the air. The ship had crashed, and it had crashed hard. Curiosity tugged at him, pushing him toward the wreckage. Derek pulled himself over the rocky terrain, navigating the sharp edges of the boulders as he carefully approached. His fingers brushed against the cold surface of the ship's hull, feeling its strange, smooth texture. It was unlike anything made by humans. He crouched down to inspect the damaged section, looking for any signs of life. Then, as he ran his fingers along the edge of a broken panel, he heard it, a faint, barely perceptible sound. It was a soft gasp, almost like a breath being drawn in. Derek froze, his heart skipping a beat. His eyes scanned the wreckage, searching for the source of the sound, and that's when he saw her. Lying among the twisted metal of the ship's remnants was a figure, an alien woman. Her skin was pale, almost luminous, and her long silvery hair tangled around her face like wisps of smoke. She was motionless at first, but the slight rise and fall of her chest confirmed that she was still alive. She was unconscious, her body battered and bruised from the crash, but there was something about her that made Derek's heart ache. She looked so fragile, so vulnerable in that moment. Without thinking, Derek dropped to his knees beside her. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for her, careful not to touch any of her injuries. She was breathing, but shallowly, as though each breath took effort. His first instinct was to leave her, to move on with his mission. But he couldn't. She was a living being, and she needed help. Gently, Derek gathered her up in his arms, lifting her carefully and cradling her against his chest. Her body was light, almost weightless, and he marveled at how delicate she seemed despite her alien features. He could see now that her ears were shaped differently from his, slightly pointed, with an elegance that reminded him of elves from ancient Earth legends. Her face, though battered, was beautiful in an otherworldly way. Her high cheekbones, delicate jawline, and full lips seemed untouched by the chaos around them. Derek's mind raced as he turned to leave the wreckage. He had no idea who or what she was, but one thing was certain: he couldn't just leave her to die here. She had to be saved. His instincts took over, guiding him back through the rocky ravine to the small shelter he had set up. It was a modest place, nothing more than a basic survival camp, but it would have to do for now. As Derek laid the alien woman down on a makeshift cot inside the shelter, he quickly began to assess her injuries. She had a deep gash on her leg, and her arms were bruised and scraped. Her breathing was still shallow, but it was steady. He wasn't a medic, but he had enough knowledge from his survival training to know what to do. He carefully cleaned her wounds with the limited medical supplies he had and wrapped them in bandages. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as he did his best to take care of her. Once her wounds were cleaned and wrapped, Derek stood back, taking a moment to observe her. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something more to her than just her appearance. There was a strength hidden within her, a power that he could feel, even if it was dormant for now. It was in the way she carried herself, even in unconsciousness. Her posture, her presence, it all hinted at something beyond just a helpless stranger stranded on a distant planet. As the hours passed, Derek kept watch over her, unsure of what to do next. He didn't speak the language of the aliens, and he had no way of knowing if she would ever wake up. He had seen plenty of dangerous creatures in his time as an explorer, but this was different. This was a person, someone who had been hurt, someone he had chosen to help. The thought of leaving her behind didn't even cross his mind. He had made his decision when he carried her out of the wreckage. He would see this through. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky darkened, leaving only the soft glow of distant stars to illuminate the shelter. Derek sat beside her, trying to shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this situation than he understood. But for now, all he could do was wait and hope that when she woke up, he would have some answers. The next few hours passed slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. Derek sat by the cot, keeping an eye on the alien woman as she lay still, her breathing faint but steady. Despite his initial fear, the more he watched her, the more he became certain of one thing. She wasn't just any random alien. There was something about her that was different. Her presence was magnetic, even in unconsciousness, and it made Derek wonder just who she was. His mind wandered back to the wreckage, replaying the events in his head. The ship had been damaged beyond recognition, but it wasn't like any crash he'd ever seen. The sleek, silver exterior, the intricate markings, the technology. It was all far advanced beyond anything humanity had ever created. What kind of people had built that ship? And why had it been destroyed in the first place? Derek shook his head and pushed those thoughts aside. There were more pressing matters at hand. He had to focus on taking care of her, whoever she was. He could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him, but he also knew there was no turning back. She was alive because of him, and he couldn't abandon her now. Just as he was about to check on her wounds again, a soft moan broke the silence. Derek quickly looked down, his heart racing. The alien woman's eyelids fluttered, and then, with a slow, steady motion, she opened her eyes. Her gaze was unfocused at first, as if she were trying to shake off the fog of unconsciousness. Then, those bright, alien eyes, deep and mesmerizing, like two pools of shimmering silver, finally settled on Derek. For a moment, they just stared at each other, neither saying a word. Derek felt a strange mix of emotions flood through him: relief, wonder, and a hint of fear. The woman blinked a few times, her expression still dazed. She tried to sit up but winced, clearly in pain. Derek immediately moved to her side, gently helping her into a sitting position. "Hey, take it easy," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. "You're safe. You've been through a lot." The alien woman didn't respond immediately. She stared at him for a moment, studying him with those otherworldly eyes, as though trying to figure him out. Then, in a voice that was surprisingly soft, she spoke. "Where am I?" Her accent was different, musical and melodic, and Derek had to concentrate to understand her. "You're on a planet," Derek said, nodding toward the shelter. "I found you after your ship crashed." She looked around the shelter, her gaze drifting from the simple bed to the small supplies scattered across the room. Derek watched her, waiting for her to speak again. But instead of responding, she slowly lifted her hand, as though testing its strength. Her fingers moved gracefully, the alien-like skin shimmering in the dim light. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for saving me." Derek's heart skipped a beat at her words. He had expected her to be confused, but instead, she seemed more composed than he had imagined. It was clear that she was trying to understand the situation, but there was a quiet strength in her demeanor that made him believe she had dealt with far worse things before. "No need to thank me," Derek replied, offering her a reassuring smile. "It's the least I could do." She gave him a small, uncertain smile in return. The moment stretched between them, and for a brief second, the silence wasn't awkward, it was peaceful. Derek couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important about this woman, something beyond her alien appearance and her strange accent. "Who are you?" Derek asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "I mean, you're not from here, obviously, but what's your name?" The alien woman paused for a moment, as though considering how to respond. Her eyes shifted to the ground, and she seemed lost in thought. Finally, she lifted her gaze to meet his once more. "My name is Alessa," she said, her voice steady now. "And I am not from here." Derek's interest piqued even more. "So, where are you from?" Alessa looked away, her expression growing more serious, as if she were weighing whether or not to reveal more. Finally, she spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. "I come from a distant star system, far beyond the reach of your people. I was sent here to negotiate peace with the factions that rule these parts of the galaxy." Derek's eyes widened slightly at her words. Negotiate peace. That's huge. But why were you stranded here? Alessa's face tightened, and for a moment, Derek saw a flash of emotion, frustration, maybe even fear, before she quickly masked it. "My ship was sabotaged," she said, her voice controlled, though Derek could sense the weight of the words. "I was attacked, and the crew was lost. I was the only one who survived." Derek nodded slowly, trying to process what she was saying. "So, you're a diplomat, or something like that?" Alessa hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I am a representative, yes. But there is more to it than that." Her voice trailed off, and she turned her gaze away, lost in thought again. Derek could tell that there was something she wasn't saying, something important. But he didn't push. Instead, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But you're safe now. I'll help you however I can." Alessa turned back to him, her eyes softening, and for the first time since waking up, she gave him a genuine smile. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And in that moment, Derek realized that his life had just become far more complicated and far more extraordinary than he could have ever imagined. The next day, Derek woke up to the soft hum of the shelter. The sun was still hidden behind the distant mountains, but the first light of dawn was beginning to creep across the sky. The shelter was quiet, and the only sound was the faint rustling of the wind outside. As he sat up, he glanced over at Alessa, who was sitting on the cot, her silver hair cascading around her shoulders like a river of light. Alessa had been awake for a while, it seemed. She was staring out of the small window, her eyes distant, as if lost in thought. Her gaze softened when she noticed Derek watching her, and she gave him a small, almost reluctant smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice still carrying that foreign, melodic quality. "I trust you slept well." Derek stretched and nodded. "Yeah, surprisingly. How are you feeling?" Alessa glanced down at the bandages wrapped around her leg and arm. "Better. The pain is manageable, but I still need time to recover." Derek stood up and moved toward the small table where a few basic food rations were laid out. He handed her a small packet of dried fruit and some water, watching her carefully as she took it from him with a graceful, almost elegant movement. "Here," he said gently, "you should eat something." Alessa accepted the food but didn't eat right away. Instead, she looked at the packet in her hand, as if weighing something in her mind. After a few moments, she finally spoke. "You've been very kind to me, Derek. More than I deserve." Derek raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "You were in trouble. I couldn't just leave you." Alessa sighed softly, her gaze falling to the ground. "You don't understand. I am not just some random traveler. My presence here is not by accident." She paused, as if trying to gather the courage to continue. "I am not just a diplomat, Derek. I am the ruler of the Zerithian Empire. I am a queen." Derek's eyes widened in shock, his hand freezing in midair as he was about to take a bite of his own ration. A queen. He blinked a few times, struggling to process what she had just said. Wait, you're telling me you're a queen? Derek asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Like an actual queen of some empire. Alessa nodded slowly, her expression grave. Yes, Derek. The Zerithian Empire is one of the most powerful civilizations in this sector of the galaxy. We have been at war with several factions for centuries, and I was sent here to negotiate a fragile peace. But her voice trailed off, and she closed her eyes as if the weight of her words was too much to bear. Derek remained silent, trying to absorb what she was saying. A queen. He had been taking care of royalty without even knowing it. He couldn't help but feel a bit overwhelmed. But his curiosity pushed him to ask more. So, why were you stranded here? You said your ship was sabotage, Derek said, sitting across from her, his mind racing. But that doesn't explain everything. How did this happen? Alessa's eyes flickered with a mix of pain and determination. My ship was attacked by enemies who didn't want peace. The sabotage was carefully planned. They knew I would be vulnerable once I entered this part of the galaxy, and they used that to their advantage. They damaged the engines and sent us off course, crashing here. But why didn't they just kill you? Derek asked, still trying to piece everything together. If they were so against peace, why leave you alive? Alessa looked at him with a somber expression, her silver eyes darkening. Because they believe I could still be useful to them, she said, her voice steady but filled with unspoken pain. They thought they could control me, force me to submit to their will, but they underestimated my resolve. She clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. I would rather die than let them dictate the fate of my people. Derek could see the fire in her eyes now, the strength that lay beneath her delicate appearance. He hadn't imagined that someone who looked so fragile could harbor such determination. He was beginning to understand that she was no ordinary woman. You've been through a lot, Derek said quietly, his voice filled with sympathy. But you're safe now. We'll figure out how to get you back to your people. I promise. Alessa gave him a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Thank you. Your kindness means more than you know. She took a deep breath and seemed to gather her thoughts. But I need to warn you, Derek. The people who attacked me will not stop. They will come for me, and they will stop at nothing to see me captured or dead. Derek leaned forward, his expression serious. Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen. We'll fight them if we have to. I won't let them hurt you. Alessa's gaze softened, a flicker of gratitude passing through her eyes. I don't deserve your protection. You are just a simple human. Derek shook his head, his jaw set with determination. You're more than just some stranger to me now, Alessa. I don't care who you are. You're a person, and I'm not going to let anyone harm you. The air between them was thick with an unspoken bond now, a bond forged through the shared understanding that their journey together had only just begun. Alessa might be a queen, but she was also someone who had lost everything. And Derek, a simple explorer, had become the one person who would stand by her. The sun had risen higher in the sky, and the warmth of the light filled the shelter. For the first time since their fateful meeting, Derek felt a sense of calm settle over him. No matter how dangerous this journey would become, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone, and neither was Alessa. The sun was setting when the first sign of trouble arrived. The wind had picked up, stirring the dust and dirt outside the shelter. Derek sat by the small window, keeping a watchful eye on the landscape. He could sense something was wrong. It was a feeling that gnawed at him. The kind of feeling a man gets when something is about to go terribly wrong. Alessa was sitting nearby, resting. Her condition had improved slightly over the past few days. She was still recovering, but she no longer seemed weak and fragile. Derek had been doing his best to care for her, though she refused to stay still for long, often pacing the shelter or attempting small exercises to keep her strength up. Despite her reassurances, Derek could see the quiet sadness in her eyes, the weight of the responsibility she carried for her people, the weight that kept her from fully resting. "Do you think they're still out there?" Derek asked, breaking the silence as he turned toward her. Alessa met his gaze, her expression thoughtful, her lips pressed into a thin line. "They will be. They know I survived, and they'll come for me." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a warning in her tone. "They'll stop at nothing to finish what they started." Derek clenched his fists, frustrated at the helplessness he felt. He had no idea who these enemies were, but from the way Alessa spoke of them, he could tell they were ruthless. He couldn't let her face them alone. She had trusted him, and now he had to live up to that trust. "I won't let them take you," Derek said, more firmly than he intended. "We'll fight them, Alessa. You're not going to be alone in this." Alessa smiled softly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Derek, but they're not like any enemy you faced. You don't know how far they'll go to get me back." Before Derek could respond, a distant sound broke the tension. At first, it was barely audible, like the faint rumble of thunder. But it grew louder and clearer, a low, vibrating hum, like engines, getting closer and closer. Derek's heart skipped a beat. He rushed to the window, looking out into the darkening landscape. "Get down," he shouted, turning to Alessa. "Now." Alessa didn't question him. She quickly moved to the side of the room, her movements graceful despite her injuries. Derek grabbed a rifle from the small pile of weapons he had scavenged earlier, his hand steady as he checked the load. His heart pounded in his chest. The sound of engines grew louder, and it wasn't just one ship. It was a whole fleet coming toward them. Derek's instincts kicked in. He knew he had to protect Alessa, no matter what. He could hear the distinct sound of ships breaking the atmosphere above. The hairs on his neck stood on end. They had arrived. "They're here," Alessa said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't seem scared, just resigned. "I told you they would come." Derek turned to her, trying to keep his voice calm. "Stay down. Stay low. I'll handle this." Alessa shook her head. "You don't understand. You can't fight them. They won't stop. But there's a way we can turn this around. I've been tracking their movement. I know where their base is." Her eyes flickered with resolve. "If we can take them by surprise, we can stop this. But we have to move fast." Derek didn't hesitate. He knew what she was saying was true. The enemy wasn't going to give them a chance to negotiate. He nodded, determined. "I'll follow your lead." The sound of the engines grew louder still, and the vibrations of their descent could be felt through the floor. They were close, very close. Derek moved to the door, peeking outside. The ship's lights were already visible in the distance, their glow casting long shadows across the landscape. They were closing in fast. "Let's go," Derek said, his voice low and urgent. Alessa nodded, standing and brushing off the dust from her clothes. She moved with a quiet confidence, the aura of a leader unmistakable. Despite her injuries, there was no hesitation in her steps. Together, they moved quickly toward the back of the shelter, where Derek had set up a small escape route. He knew they couldn't stay here. They needed to move, get to the hidden base Alessa spoke of, and deal with the threat head-on. As they reached the cover of the rocks surrounding the shelter, Derek glanced back once more. The ships were now just above them, descending with precision. He had no idea what kind of force they were up against, but he knew one thing for sure. If Alessa was right, this wasn't just a group of mercenaries. It was a military operation, and they weren't here to talk. Alessa turned to him, her voice steady despite the situation. "We have to get to the mountains. There's an underground entrance there, a safe place where they can't track us." Derek nodded. "Lead the way." They moved quickly, keeping low to avoid detection. The terrain was rough, and the light was fading fast, but Derek stayed close behind Alessa, trusting her judgment. The ships were now landing, and Derek could hear the faint hiss of their engines as they powered down. They were almost on the ground. As they reached the edge of the mountain range, Alessa paused and turned to Derek, her eyes hard with determination. "This is where we make our stand." Derek felt the weight of her words settle over him. There was no going back now. They had no choice but to face the danger head-on. As he looked at Alessa, he saw not just the queen of a powerful empire, but a woman who had lost everything and was now fighting for the future of her people. They were in this together. The quiet crunch of footsteps echoed across the rocky terrain as Derek and Alessa made their way to the hidden mountain entrance. The world around them was silent, save for the distant sound of ships landing and the whispering wind through the jagged peaks. The sun had fully set now, and the cold of the night seeped into the air, but neither of them seemed to notice. They were focused only on the path ahead. Alessa, determined to escape, and Derek, intent on protecting her at all costs. Alessa led the way, her movements careful but quick, as if she were familiar with the terrain. Derek followed closely behind, his rifle ready in his hands, though he hadn't yet seen any sign of the mercenaries. He didn't need to hear the sound of engines anymore to know they were out there. The stillness of the night had taken on a heavy quality, one that made his heart race. They were being hunted. As they reached a small cliff, Alessa stopped. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable, her silver eyes glinting faintly in the moonlight. Derek watched her, noticing that she seemed calm, almost too calm, given the situation. "I can feel them," she said quietly, her voice steady. "They're not far behind." Derek glanced over his shoulder, scanning the horizon. Nothing. But the way Alessa spoke, it was as if she could sense their presence in a way he couldn't. "They'll come for us," she continued, her tone soft but firm. "But it's not just me they want. It's what I carry with me, what I represent." Derek frowned, unsure of what she meant. He didn't say anything but simply waited, knowing she would explain in her own time. But when Alessa spoke again, her voice held a weight that made his chest tighten. "I am the queen of the Zerithian Empire, Derek. I told you that before, but you don't understand the full extent of it. My empire is vast, spanning across multiple star systems. It has enemies, many enemies, those who would stop at nothing to tear it apart." She paused, her gaze distant. "I am not just a queen. I am the last of my line, the last of my blood." Derek blinked, trying to grasp the gravity of her words. The last of her blood. It hit him like a hammer. She wasn't just an alien diplomat. She was the heir to an entire empire, a powerful empire with a rich history. How is that possible?" Derek asked, his voice barely a whisper. Alessa's face softened, a flash of sadness flickering in her eyes. "My people were once a thriving civilization, Derek. We ruled vast stretches of the galaxy, bringing peace to countless worlds. But our enemies, those who sought power for themselves, waged war against us. The war lasted for centuries, and in the end, it destroyed us." She looked at him, her silver eyes intense. "The only reason I'm alive is because of the peace negotiations I was sent to complete. But I'm too late. The damage is done. My empire is crumbling, and the forces that want to see it fall are closing in." Derek took a step closer, his mind racing. "So those ships, they're coming after you because of who you are? Because you're the queen?" Alessa nodded. "Yes, they see me as a symbol of hope for my people, or of destruction. Either way, they will stop at nothing to eliminate me. They want to break the last thread of unity that holds my empire together." A shiver ran down Derek's spine. He knew the stakes were high. But this was beyond anything he had imagined. Alessa wasn't just a stranger he had found in the wreckage. She was royalty. A queen, fighting to hold together a broken empire while being hunted by those who wanted to see it fall. "But why didn't you tell me this before?" Derek asked, his voice gentle but filled with confusion. "Why keep it a secret?" Alessa's gaze softened, and she took a slow breath. "I couldn't. I didn't want to put you in danger. You saved my life, Derek. The moment you did, you became a part of something much bigger than either of us. and I didn't want to drag you into this war. But now, it's too late. They're coming, and they'll destroy everything in their path until they have me." Derek's mind was spinning. The weight of what she had just said hit him hard, but it didn't change the fact that he had already made up his mind. He had promised to protect her, and he would, no matter the cost. "We'll fight them together," Derek said, his voice resolute. "We'll figure out a way to stop them. We have to." Alessa studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand the risks. If you're caught in this, there will be no turning back." Derek clenched his fists. "I understand more than you think, Alessa. I didn't sign up for any of this. But I can't leave you. You've trusted me, and I'm not going to walk away now. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Alessa's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, the weight of the crown she carried seemed to lift from her shoulders. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that made Derek's heart skip. "Thank you, Derek. I don't know what I would have done without you." The sincerity in her voice struck him deep. It was then that Derek realized just how much he had come to care for her, not just as a person he had helped, but as a leader, a warrior, and someone who was fighting a battle far beyond anything he had ever imagined. "We're in this together," Derek said, his voice firm, "and I won't let you fall." As the two of them shared that moment of quiet understanding, the sound of engines grew louder again. The mercenaries were closing in. The time for talk was over. It was time to face the enemy. Alessa took a deep breath, her silver eyes hardening with renewed determination. "Let's go," she said quietly, her voice full of the quiet strength of a queen who had never given up, no matter the odds. And as Derek followed her into the mountains, he knew that whatever happened next, he would stand by her side, ready to fight for her and the empire she was trying to save. The night was colder now, the air thick with tension as Derek and Alessa made their way deeper into the mountains. The stars above were dimmed by the shadows of the towering peaks, and the ground beneath their feet was rocky and uneven. Derek's heart pounded in his chest, not just from the physical exertion of climbing, but from the weight of the situation. Alessa led the way, her movements as fluid and confident as ever, despite the injuries she was still recovering from. Derek followed closely behind, his senses on high alert. Every rustling sound, every shift in the wind made him jump. Convinced the mercenaries were right on their heels, he could still hear the faint hum of the ships above, but the rocky terrain made it difficult to pinpoint where the enemy was. Alessa had been silent for the last few minutes, lost in her thoughts. Derek glanced up at her, noticing how her expression seemed distant, almost detached. He couldn't imagine what it was like for her, having her entire life turned upside down, being hunted by enemies who sought to destroy everything she had built. He had no idea how someone could carry that kind of burden. But one thing was clear: Alessa was no ordinary queen. She was strong, and despite everything, she had never lost her determination. "We're almost there," Alessa said, her voice soft but steady. "There's a small base hidden just beyond these rocks. We'll find shelter there and regroup." Derek nodded, but his thoughts were a mix of uncertainty and worry. The closer they got to the base, the more the weight of their situation seemed to sink in. Alessa's enemies were relentless, and he had no idea what kind of force they were up against. The mere idea of facing off with a well-organized military force made his stomach churn. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a man who had found an alien woman stranded on a planet. But now, this woman had become his responsibility, and he wasn't about to walk away. They reached the base shortly after, a hidden outpost carved into the side of a mountain. The entrance was well concealed, and Derek had to follow Alessa through a narrow passage to get inside. Once inside, the temperature was warmer, and the air smelled faintly of machinery and old metal. There were a few crates scattered around the room, most of them empty, but there was enough space for them to hide out for a while. Derek took a moment to catch his breath as Alessa moved to the center of the room. She seemed at ease here, like she had been in this place before, and it made Derek wonder just how much she had been through in her life. But there was no time for questions. The mercenaries were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to capture her. Alessa turned to him then, her expression serious, her silver eyes shining in the dim light. "Derek, I need you to understand something. We're not just facing mercenaries. They are part of a much larger network, one that has infiltrated several key parts of the galaxy. If they find us, they will not stop until we're both dead. They've been hunting me for years." Derek swallowed hard, the gravity of her words sinking in. "I don't care who they are," he said, his voice firm. "I won't let them hurt you. I've made a promise." Alessa's eyes softened, and for the first time in days, she looked vulnerable. "You don't know what you're up against. They're ruthless. They have the resources to track us, to destroy us if they want. And if they find you, Derek, they will use you against me. They won't hesitate." Derek shook his head. "I've fought worse than this. If they want to come after me, fine. But I won't leave you." There was a long pause as Alessa stared at him, as if weighing his words. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You don't know the full picture. I can't explain everything now, but I need you to trust me when I say this. If we are going to survive this, we have to fight back. We can't just hide and wait for them to come to us." Derek nodded, a sense of clarity beginning to take root. He had never been one to run from a fight. And now, with Alessa by his side, he wasn't about to start. "What do we need to do?" Alessa moved toward a small table near the wall, where she began to pull out several pieces of equipment. Derek watched as she assembled a few tools, her hands moving quickly and efficiently. She was clearly prepared for situations like this, and her calm demeanor was starting to rub off on him. "We need to take out their communications," Alessa explained, glancing at Derek. "If we disrupt their ability to coordinate, we might have a chance to slow them down. We'll also need to sabotage their ships. If we can cripple their fleet, they won't be able to track us." Derek raised an eyebrow. "You're planning on taking out an entire fleet?" Alessa looked at him, her silver eyes burning with a quiet fire. "I'm not planning. I'm going to do it, with or without your help, Derek. You're in this now, whether you like it or not." Derek stared at her for a long moment, his mind racing with the implications. He had no idea how to take down a fleet of mercenaries. But Alessa was right. He was already in this. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. "I'm with you," he said, his voice resolute. "Tell me what to do." Alessa smiled, though it was tinged with the seriousness of the situation. "Good. We're not alone in this fight anymore. Now, let's make sure they know what happens when they mess with us." Derek nodded. He could feel the weight of the conflict pressing down on them both. They were about to take on a force far greater than either of them, but for the first time in days, Derek didn't feel afraid. With Alessa by his side, he felt like there was nothing they couldn't handle. Together, they were going to stop the mercenaries. The air in the hidden base was thick with anticipation as Derek and Alessa sat together, their heads bent over a makeshift map laid out on the table. The faint hum of the machinery around them did little to break the heavy silence. Outside, the wind howled across the rocky landscape, but inside the small shelter, all that mattered was the task ahead. Alessa's eyes glinted with quiet determination as she traced her finger along the map, highlighting key locations within the enemy base. The place where their ships were stationed, the communication towers that linked their forces across the galaxy, and the weak spots that would allow them to disrupt their enemies' plans. "We have one chance at this," Alessa said, her voice steady, but tinged with the gravity of the situation. "If we're going to succeed, we need to be fast and silent. The mercenaries will have guards around the perimeter, but if we move quickly, we can disable their communications and cripple their fleet." Derek studied the map, his brow furrowed as he tried to process everything. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a man who had been thrust into a war far bigger than he had ever imagined. But standing here with Alessa, he understood one thing: he couldn't turn back. Not now. "I'm ready," Derek said, his voice firm. Tell me what we need to do. Alessa nodded. First, we'll make our way to the communication tower. I'll handle the technical side. You'll need to disable the guards. After that, we move to the shipyards and plant the sabotage devices on their ships. We'll have one shot at this, and once the devices are set, we'll need to leave immediately. Derek nodded, his eyes narrowing as he mentally prepared himself for what was to come. You know, you make it sound simple, he said, trying to lighten the mood, though the tension was palpable. Alessa gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. It's never simple, but we've made it this far. The plan was set. They would move under the cover of darkness, using the jagged terrain to conceal their movements. Alessa's sharp mind and resourcefulness had mapped out every detail, while Derek's knowledge of survival would keep them hidden from the mercenaries. They would need to rely on each other if they were going to pull this off. As the night deepened, they gathered their gear, small, quiet tools for disabling security systems, and weapons to deal with the guards if necessary. Derek double-checked his rifle, making sure it was fully loaded, while Alessa worked with a small device that would help her override the security systems. Ready? Derek asked, looking at Alessa. Alessa nodded. Ready. Together, they slipped out of the shelter and into the cold night, their movements deliberate and silent. The sound of their footsteps was swallowed by the vast emptiness around them, the moonlight casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. They moved swiftly, staying low, and using the rocks as cover. Derek's heart raced, not just from the physical exertion, but from the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting for something bigger than themselves. The communication tower loomed ahead, a tall, intimidating structure with blinking lights that seemed to mock their stealth. Derek and Alessa approached it cautiously, taking note of the guards stationed outside. They were armed, but not paying much attention. Derek could use that to their advantage. Stay low, Alessa whispered. We'll get past them. Derek nodded, and together they crept closer to the tower, their footsteps light against the soft earth. They reached the outer perimeter without being noticed. Alessa pulled out her device, and within seconds, the security system buzzed quietly, unlocking the door to the tower. Derek stood guard, keeping watch while Alessa moved inside, her movements graceful and confident as she worked. It only took a few minutes before the system was completely disabled. Alessa emerged from the tower with a small smile, her eyes shining with the thrill of success. One down, she said softly. Derek exhaled in relief. Let's keep moving. They continued on, using the cover of night to get closer to the shipyard. Derek's thoughts kept returning to what Alessa had said earlier, that they had only one chance at this. If they failed, there would be no coming back. He couldn't let that happen, not when so much was at stake. As they neared the shipyard, Derek's heart began to pound again. The sight of the ships, parked in neat rows, was both overwhelming and daunting. These weren't just any ships. They were advanced, military-grade vessels, each one capable of causing immense destruction. Derek knew that taking them out would send a message. But it wasn't going to be easy. They snuck past the perimeter guards, moving silently in the shadows. Alessa's mind was already at work, locating the weak points on the ships. With quick precision, she began to plant the sabotage devices, careful not to make a sound. Derek kept watch, his senses heightened, alert for any sign of movement. He could hear footsteps approaching. His grip tightened around his rifle. His pulse quickened, but he held his ground, waiting for Alessa to finish. The footsteps grew louder. And then, just as Derek was about to signal to her, he saw the guard coming around the corner. Alessa, Derek whispered urgently. She looked up, her eyes widening in understanding. Without a word, she ducked behind a large crate, her movements fast and fluid. Derek quickly crouched down, aiming his rifle at the approaching guard. The guard was now only a few feet away. Derek's finger hovered over the trigger, but just before he could take action, the guard passed right by him, oblivious to his presence. Derek exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his body as the guard disappeared into the shadows. Alessa finished planting the last device and turned to Derek. "We're done," she said quietly. "Let's get out of here." Derek nodded, his mind already moving to the next step. "This is it, Alessa. We've done what we came here to do. Now we get out." They moved quickly, retracing their steps back to the mountains. But as they reached the edge of the shipyard, the distant sound of engines filled the air once again. The mercenaries had arrived, and this time, they weren't going to let them go so easily.